Well, Ethel played the organ, and when
The church organ.
the church organ, and when the coffin came in, it was right next to the organ.
Open.
It was an open casket, and Campbell, what was his first name?
Tom?
No, the other Campbell.
Oh, it was George
Burns-
Campbell.
George
Campbell
George
died of
Campbell.
cancer.
George died of
In
cancer.
the middle of July, it was very hot.
Yeah.
And
And of course, the windows in the church were sealed shut.
Oh no.
And so they had the body there, and the open casket. And Abe and Mike Fisher were, no, Percy Brown, I guess it was.
Yeah, it was
yeah,
Percy.
Abe and Percy were the
They were
undertakers.
the undertakers. I don't know just what they did to prepare the body.
Not much.
Not much.
It was in their shop, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, and Abe's
Well,
show.
Abe built the coffins.
Abe built the casket, and
Yeah.
Percy
And-
did the preparation.
And
Percy shaved the corpse.
Yeah. And that was about it.
but there was a side story that Mike Fisher was helping Abe one day, and Abe said, "Oh look, he's winked." And Mike scurried out of the shop. Anyway, back to the story. Poor Ethel was playing the organ, and they had the casket open, and the people were coming up and stroking George's shirt, not shirt, his cheek. And poor Ethel was just a young girl, you know, and so she remembered that, and the odor, I guess, was just
Yep.
impossible. I remember Dad was trying to open the window, but it was sealed shut. The church outside windows. So that's one of Ethel's experiences as an organist. Anyway.
Ethel remembered how one of their favorite hymns in those days was "Forever with the Lord."
Oh yeah.
And she said, very often with some old rascal, she couldn't imagine what the Lord would do with him. But nevertheless, she had to play it, and they had to sing it, "Forever with the Lord." So that was their old pump organ. She would be pedaling
pump
away and
organ,
playing
yeah.
it.
I think "Safe in the Arms of Jesus" was another.
Oh, that would be another one. Yeah.
Another one on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did you ever play the organ in
No.
the church, Steve? No.
No.
But,
But Fred remembers digging graves in the winter.
yeah, that was Uncle Ertz.
Oh, yes, that was right in the dead of
And
winter.
that was in
wasn't it?
February,
Yeah.
I think February. Remember Uncle Art had gone out to rescue an old horse in the straw pile.
And ended up with a terrible
And he was trying to lift the old horse out and got a rupture.
He ruptured himself.
So of course he went into Saskatoon for the operation, and it was bungled, I guess.
Well, died with a clot on the brain, a blood clot on the brain.
Something happened.
Oh,
Died
okay.
when they were operating on him.
And he was, what, 50?
Yeah.
Just early, mid-50s, I guess.
But wasn't that the grave when you wanted to put the rough box
Yeah,
down?
Albert and I were trying to dig the grave, and it was all frozen down 8 feet, you know, and we're hoping we'd get wide enough for the coffin to go down.
I remember A.J. telling me this story, how they wouldn't put the rough box down, and it wasn't quite big enough. So he said Fred was the first one. He jumped down in there with a pit and a shovel, and it was soon big enough. Fred took action immediately. Had to get Uncle Art down the ground.
I remember how cold it was, you know, in February, and
Oh gosh.
you know how the frost would go down 8 feet?
Yeah. Uncle Dick died in the cold of the winter also.
Yeah, I guess he did.
We gathered round. I helped dig that grave, and that was froze right to the bottom.
And no backhoes in those days.
No backhoes.
You have to tell the story about Uncle
Uncle Walter?
Uncle Walter dying, and Aunt Marine's mother teasing. Aunt Margaret had gone in for the mail,
Yeah.
and Annie.
Oh, yeah. Well, Uncle Walter died in Vancouver, so of course I was summoned. He had my phone number, so I was summoned to take action. So I had him cremated and mailed the ashes back to Zelma. And it was right in harvest time, I guess, wasn't it, Steve? Anyway, Pete went in
Yeah,
to
I
get
think it was. Yeah.
Pete went in to get
yeah.
the mail, and Aunt Maureen gave him an odd look and said, "Uncle Walter's here." So Pete had to pick up the package and took it home and stored it in the basement until they got through the harvest before they did anything about the ashes, I guess. I think they finally buried his ashes in his mother's grave, didn't they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, at the foot of the
Well,
grave.
who was the minister there at that time, I wonder?
I don't know who that would be.
Would it be
Could have been
Desmond?
almost anybody.
Yes,
There
but-
were one of the stories about Uncle Walter, he was a wanderer, and Uncle Harvey was in hospital out in Kelowna, so we went out to see him, and Nancy pulled me aside and said, "Don't tell Harvey that Walter has died. The shock will be so it'll probably kill him." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, "Harvey always calls the roll when I come in, and he'll start, 'Alice is dead, isn't she? Yeah, John's gone, Art's gone, isn't he? And Alan's gone, Charlie's dead.' And finally he'll say, 'Just Walter and I were the only ones left.' And so she said, if you just tell him that Walter died, it'll be too much." So I said, all right. So I, with a perfectly straight face, Harvey eventually asked me, "Well, how's Walter getting along?" So I said, "Oh, well, he goes out for a walk in the morning. He's still living there in the Salvation Army. Walks down to the CPR station and has a smoke, and then he starts back up again, and it's getting close to noon, so he has time to drop in for a glass of beer, and then he gets back up and has his lunch." And Vera was kind of standing behind me, and she could have seen her face as I told this big lie with a straight face. But Harvey was quite satisfied, and presently he said, "Waddy was a mistake." Because Waddy, of course, was a menopause baby. He was the youngest.
Yeah.
Grandma had 15 pregnancies and raised 12 of them. 8 sons and 4 daughters.
Yeah. Well,
And the 4 daughters all married sons-in-law. And
rascals.
so father had these 4 brothers-in-law.
And you have to tell what they called them.
Well, Shorty had married Alice.
The worst of them animals.
Apparently, they were still in Manitoba, I think, weren't they, at that time?
I think so, yeah.
And the old gent, they always referred to Grandfather Cline as the old gentleman, but behind his back, they between themselves, they would talk about the old gent. And of course, I was telling Una the other day how the grandparents must have been in their late 60s, early 70s, but they were always the old folks.
Yeah.
We'll go down to see the old folks,
Yeah.
or we'll phone the old folks and see how they're doing. But anyway, Shorty MacDonald was not grandfather's choice of a husband for his eldest daughter, Alice, and Jimmy Reed was there. And Jimmy Reed was so slow that apparently Shorty came trotting up with a fancy buggy and a nice trotting horse and whisked Alice away. And apparently they ran off and got married, much to the old gent's annoyance, because none of them ever approved of Shorty. Shorty never passed up a bottle he could drink, or he never passed up a poker table he could play poker. And my father-in-law, John Morgan, he circulated around with these guys, and he told me this story one time, not in the presence of his wife, because he never told these kind of stories in the presence of my mother-in-law, but he told me how he and one of his old friends on a Saturday night decided they'd drive over to Zelma to see what Tom Campbell was doing. And so they got over there, and Tom Campbell had a poker game going with Shorty, and they had a couple of half-drunken harvesters there playing poker with them, and Shorty was dealing like this. Good cards went to his partner, bad cards. This was Shorty MacDonald. This was Shorty MacDonald.
Uncle Shorty.
Uncle
Yeah,
Shorty.
Shorty.
He had an actual first name.
Well, then
Earl.
Martha.
Earl.
Well, then Martha married old Brooks,
Yeah, old
and he was a very arrogant Englishman, but he was quite a financier. Apparently, he ended up with quite a nice estate. But he was mad at all his sons, and so he had left the estate to his brother Arthur, who was still living somewhere in London or in England anyway.
In England, yeah.
I remember Pete had met him when he was over there in the Air Force, and so Arthur didn't want the estate, so Jack had to go over to settle this up. Anyway, poor old Brooks committed suicide.
Yeah,
didn't he?
shot himself.
Yeah, shot.
Drove in the field with a shotgun.
Yeah, with a shotgun.
Blew his head
Took
off.
brains off.
Yeah.
Well, then the third daughter married Albert Todd,
Old Toddy.
the Toddy, and they always refer to him as Toddy. and then the fourth daughter was Grace, and John Workentine came to be the hired man, and he married the boss's daughter.
The old Mennonite.
Yeah, the old Mennonite. So these were Father's four brothers-in-law. And Father tended to be the sort of the go-between among all these brothers-in-law. well, you both worked with Uncle Fred, and he didn't think much of any of the brothers-in-law, did he? Anyway, that was the story of his life. Well, then, of course, I had the good fortune to Una married me, and so Una comes from a rather small family, so I'm always telling her about all these uncles and aunts that we have, and cousins. So it's quite a change from her rather small family into this large clan.
You have to tell the story about Uncle Harvey when they were traveling by train, and Uncle Harvey was
coming out
two. They were coming on the train.
Coming
and
out in
Uncle
the
Harvey
colonist
was having
car.
a full-blown
Harvey was
temper
the toddler.
tantrum.
Harvey was about 1.5 or 2.
Yeah, I just be.
And Harvey, they were coming out in the old colonial train from Ontario. Did you heard this story? Is Phil still there on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's still there.
Phil must know
Looking
this
attentive,
story.
I don't know.
And Uncle Harvey was having a 1.5 or a 2-year-old fit, laying on the floor in the middle of the train, pounding his heels and hollering at the top of his voice. And a very nice lady thought maybe she could help, so she offered him a cookie. And as Dad described the story, Harvey stopped hollering. He took the cookie and looked at it, and then he flew as far as he could down the aisle and continued his roaring and pounding his heels.
But I have one about Uncle Harvey and Jimmy. Jimmy would usually turn up for meals, you know.
Conveniently.
Jimmy Reed.
Jimmy Reed, yeah.
There are any number of Jimmy Reed stories.
Anyway, Harvey was quite a joker, and Nancy had a bowl of gravy that she came and put on the table, and Harvey said, he put it in front of Jimmy and said, "Here's your soup, Jimmy." So Jimmy ate it down.
Jimmy said, "Thank you."
Thank you very much.
He cleaned it out.
Can't imagine what that
Nobody
Nancy
else
thought.
Nancy wasn't very happy.
And the other one about Jimmy, he and Walter were both in the old Salvation Sally Ann home in Vancouver, you know.
Yes.
So Uncle Walter was going to make a friend of Jimmy. He invited him down for tea. But Jimmy never invited him back. That was the end of a great friendship.
One of the early stories when they were all still young bachelors and they had all gone out, and Jimmy would never pick up the bill. He would never pay his share. So the brothers, they put their heads together beforehand and said they were going to make Jimmy pay the bill. And so they all sat there and they waited. And they waited for an hour, and finally Jimmy said, "Oh, damn it all," and so he paid. The only way they could pay. But the other story about, remember Uncle Fred? Uncle Fred unfortunately was losing his hair, and Jimmy advised him if he would rinse his head with coal oil, that would make the hair grow.
Oh!
But it didn't have any effect. Uncle Fred got rid of his hair at an early age, so he wanted to show off his magnificent bull.
He blamed Jimmy for losing his hair.
Blame Jimmy.
Maybe